Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. We're going to tackle an essay. We don't read many essays yet, but we're going to start reading some essays. This is Henry David Thoreau's essay called Civil Disobedience. We're going to read it in two parts, and then we're going to analyze it. So pay attention. This is a little different than reading stories, novels, dramas, etc. Not that you shouldn't pay attention with the other things, but essays are different. So pay attention. Civil disobedience. I heartily accept the motto that government is best, which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which I also believe, that government is best, which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient. But most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against the standing army, and there are many, and weighty, and they deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against the standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. And the government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool. For in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. I'm going to stop there for a moment and talk about this introduction. We'll analyze it a little later. I want to define a few words for you because when they write essays, you got to follow carefully, take copious notes, maybe read it a few times, and we'll do that in the analysis. Expedient means it's convenient and practical, although possibly improper or moral. It's expedient. It's expedient. It's expedient to keep charging on my charge card and paying a little bit off at a time. Expedient, convenient, and practical. Inexpedient is not practical or suitable or advisable. It's inexpedient. Why am I defining these words? Because he talks about them and uses them in his essay. Expedient, the government is best and expedient. And most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes inexpedient. So he's talking also in the first paragraph about the rules for a standing army. Arguments against standing armies have been made across the political spectrum and have included concerns about their political, economic, social, and moral effects. And some typical arguments for standing armies: tyranny. English Republican writers believe that standing armies which pay their members to fight are like mercenaries and they promote tyranny. They argued that true patriots fight for a cause and not for money. Freedom. Thomas Jefferson believed a standing army is inconsistent with freedom and it goes against the spirit of the country. He favored the use of militia. Involuntary quartering. People also disliked the involuntary quartering of British soldiers. They used to do that prior to the Revolution. They would billet soldiers into the homes of people, which was also included in the Bill of Rights. If you read the Bill of Rights, it tells you you can't do that, can't billet soldiers. And public liberty. Anti-federalist Brutus believed that the power to maintain a standing army in a peacetime is dangerous to public liberty. So try to remember that there's arguments pro and con, and that Thoreau is actually using the arguments against the standing army against the government. One more note that the Mexican-American War was a conflict between 1846 and 1848. So now we have an idea when this was written. And I'm going to go back here to the top for a moment. And his essay was originally published in 1849 under the title Resistance to Civil Government. Thoreau was supposedly inspired to write this essay after being jailed in 1846. So the war was 1846 to 1848. This was published in 1849. The Mexican War is over, but he's writing it because of the Mexican War and another topic you'll find out in a moment. So the American Civil War was 61 to 65. So this predates the Civil War. Okay, you got that? That's just a little background to put this in context. Let's continue. This American government, what is it but a tradition? Though a recent one, endeavoring to transmit itself unimpaired to posterity. But each instant it loses some of its integrity? It has not the vitality and force of a single living man, for a single man can bend it to his will. I want you to notice the use of the word it. This is a pronoun. He's going to use it in this upcoming paragraph and throughout this essay. And remember, pronouns are dangerous. Why? Because they replace the noun, and you gotta learn what the noun is, or you're gonna misread the pronoun. So they can bend it to his will. Bend what? The American government. Really? It is a sort of wooden gun to the people themselves, and if ever they should use it in earnest as a real one against each other, it will surely split. But it is not the less necessary for this, for the people must have some complicated machinery or other, and they must hear its din. Its din, they must hear the machinery to satisfy that idea of government which they have. He's saying, well, we gotta hear something going on. Governments show thus how successfully men can be opposed on, and even impose on themselves for their own advantage. It is excellent, we must allow. It is excellent, we must all allow. What is it? The American government. This is what he's talking about, ladies and gentlemen. The American government. Let me write that. Let me accentuate that. The American government is excellent, we must all allow. Yet, this government never of itself further any enterprise, and by the alacrity which it got out of its way, the brisk and cheerful readiness. The American government, it does not keep the country free. It, the American government, does not settle the West. It, the American government, does not educate. Does not educate, period. See it? He's not too fond of the American government. Would you agree with that? The character inherent in American people has done all of that has been accomplished. And it would have been done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes got in its way. So you can tell from the beginning that Mr. Thoreau is not pro-government. Keep that in mind. For government is an expedient. There's the word again, expedient. Keep that word in mind. What does expedient mean? Convenient and practical, but may be improper or immoral. I'm not saying that he's saying, and he's not saying that he's saying that the American government is immoral. He's just saying it's an expedient. It's convenient. The government is expedient, by which men would fain succeed in letting one another alone. And it has been said, when it is most expedient, the governed are most let alone by it. Trade and commerce, if they were not made of Indian rubber, would never manage to bounce over the obstacles which legislators are continually putting in their way. And if one were to judge these men wholly by the effects of their actions, and not partly by their intentions, they would deserve to be classed and punished with those mischievous persons who put obstructions on the railroads. He's not too fond of legislators either. But to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government. In other words, I'm not asking for no government, but I am asking at once for a better government. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step toward obtaining it. I'm going to repeat that. I'm asking not at once for no government. I'm not saying I don't want a government, but I'm asking at once for a better government, and let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and then will be one step toward attaining it. After all, the practical reason why, when the power is once in the hands of the people, a majority are permitted, and for a long period continue to rule, is not because that they are most likely to be in the right, nor because this seems fairest to the minority, but because that they are physically the strongest. Pay attention to that sentence. The practical reason when the power is in the hands of the people, a majority are permitted, we're allowing the majority, is not because that they're right, and it's not because they're fair to the minority, but because they're stronger. But a government in which the majority rule, in all cases, cannot be based on justice, even as far as men understand it. Can there not be a government in which majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience? In which majorities decide only the questions to which the rule of expediency is applicable? Must the citizen ever for a moment, or in the least degree, resign his conscience to the legislator? Why has every man a conscience then? I think that we should be men first and subjects afterward. He's using men in the universal sense. Of course, he means women, but this is 1846 or so. So remember, women didn't have the vote yet. But do not, if you're a woman reading with Jimmy, do not feel neglected, please. I think that we should be men and women first. How's that? And subjects afterwards. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. Think about what he's saying. It is not desirable to cultivate a respect for the law so much as for the right. You should cultivate a respect for the right. And the only obligation which I have a right to assume is to do at any time what I think is right. See my question mark? It is truly enough said that a corporation has no conscience, but a corporation of conscientious men is a corporation with a conscience. The law never made men a whit more just, and by means of their respect for it, the law, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. A common and natural result of an undue respect for the law is that you may see a file of soldiers, colonel, captain, corporal, privates, powder monkeys, and all, marching in admirable order over a hill and dale to the wars, against their wills, aye, against their common sense and consciences, which make it very steep marching indeed, and produces a palpitation of the heart. In other words, you get excited when you see all this. They have no doubt that it is a damnable business in which they are concerned, and they all are peaceably inclined. In other words, they don't want to go marching, do they? Now, what are they? Men at all? Or some movable forts and magazines at the service of some unscrupulous man of power? Visit the Navy Yard and behold a Marine such as a man as an American government can make, or such that it can make a man with its black arts, a mere shadow and reminiscence of humanity, a man laid out alive and standing, and already, as one may say, buried under the arms with funeral accomplishments, though it may be, quote, not a drum was heard, nor a funeral note, as his corpse to the rampants we hurried. Not a soldier discharged his farewell shot over the grave where our hero was buried. This is from the burial of Sir John Moore after Corona, 1817. I'm going to read that to you later on. Are you getting a sense that he's anti-war? The mass of men serve the state, thus, not as men mainly, but as machines with their bodies. They are the standing army and the militia, jailers, constables, posse comitatus, etc. And in most cases, there is no free exercise, whatever of the judgment or the moral sense, but that they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones. And wooden men can perhaps be manufactured that will serve the purpose as well. Such command no more respect than men of straw or a lump of dirt. They have the same sort of worth as horses and dogs. Yet, such as these are commonly esteemed good citizens. Others, as most legislators, politicians, lawyers, ministers, and office holders, serve the state, chiefly with their heads. And they are rarely there making any moral distinctions. They are likely to serve the devil, without intending to, as God. A very few as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense, and men serve the state with their consciences, and so necessarily resist it for the most part. And they are commonly treated as enemies. So he's basically saying, these are just lemmings, right? They go to war, they're machines, they're wooden. But if you serve with your conscience, you're treated as an enemy. These are important concepts to think about. A wise man will only be useful as a man and will not submit to be clay and stop a hole to keep the wind away, but leave that office to his dust at least. I am too high-born to be propertied, to be a secondary at control, or useful serving man and instrument to any sovereign state throughout the world. This is from The Life and Death of King John by Shakespeare. Thoreau is an educated man, and he's writing this essay, and when you write an essay, sometimes you have allusions. These are allusions to other works, footnotes, citations, and he's doing this to prove his point. He's trying to prove a point. What point is that? Well, I don't know yet. I have a hunch. You may have a hunch. It has something to do with the war going on. Certainly, it has something to do with what it means to be a citizen. It has something to do with what the government is or is not. He who gives himself entirely to his fellow men appears to them useless and selfish. But he who gives himself partially to them is pronounced a benefactor and a philanthropist. Think about what he's saying. How does it become a man to behave towards this American government today? I answer that he cannot, without disgrace, be associated with it. I'm going to repeat that. How do we behave towards today's American government? You cannot, without disgrace, be associated with it. So if you associate yourself with the government, you're in disgrace. I cannot for an instant recognize the political organization as my government, which is the slave's government also. Aha. Don't forget, in 1846, there was, in fact, slavery. Keep that in mind. Well, Jimmy, it's a bad thing, slavery. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying keep your mind open. Remember the conditions in 1846 when he's writing this. Because this is an essay. We're really trying to understand this essay which is different than a story, but not so different. This is a first-person narrator. This is, in fact, Thoreau narrating this. He's telling the story. And because he's in the story, he is a first-person narrator, and you're going to hear about this in the analysis. He's subject to the foibles, right, of being a human being. This is what he believes. This government, as my government, which is also, he doesn't want to have anything to do with it because it's also a slave's government. All men recognize the right of revolution. That is, the right to refuse allegiance to and to resist the government when its tyranny or its inefficiency are great and unendurable. Don't forget, 1776, right? That was the Revolution of America. It's not even 100 years yet, right? This is 1846, so it's within the guy's lifetime, or certainly, I don't know how old Thoreau was. That's not important, but it just happened. The American Revolution, and that's really, all men recognize the right of revolution. But almost all say that such is not the case now. Almost all say that it's not the case now. But such was the case, they think, in the Revolution of 75. And there it is, right? The American Revolution. What is the posse comitatus? It's the Latin phrase that refers to a group of citizens who are called upon by a sheriff or other person of the peace to help keep the peace, to apprehend criminals or conduct rescues, because the sheriff may not be able to do it, so he calls a posse. If you've ever watched a Western, let's get a posse together, right? They don't finish the word. It's posse comitatus. They don't want to say comitatus, so they just say, let's get the posse together. So from now on, whenever you see a Western, just remember, this is what they're talking about. The sheriff doesn't have enough men. Get the posse together. Posse comitatus. Latin. Okay? If one were to tell me that this was a bad government because it taxed certain foreign commodities brought to its ports, it's most probable that I shouldn't make ado about it, for I can do without them. What's them? What is them? The foreign commodities. All machines have their friction. There's the word machines again. And possibly this does enough good to counterbalance the evil. So he puts an example here that if the government were going to tax commodities, he could do without them. At any rate, it is a great evil to make a stir about it. He's saying it's a great evil to make a stir, to object to this. What? Tax foreign commodities. But, excuse me, the inevitable but. But when the friction comes to have its machine and opposition and robbery are organized, when its machine, who's it? The government? When the government's machine, oppression and robbery are organized. And I say, let us not have such a machine any longer. In other words, I don't want this type of government. In other words, when a sixth of the population of a nation which has undertaken to be the refuge of liberty are slaves, and a whole country is unjustly overrun and conquered by a foreign army and subjected to military law, I think that it is not too soon for honest men to rebel and revolutionize. What's he talking about here, ladies and gentlemen? What's he talking about? Should I read that again? Maybe I think I have to. When a sixth of the population of a nation has undergone to be a refuge of liberty, but are slaves. If a sixth of the nation that says we're a refuge for liberty are slaves, and a whole country is unjustly overrun and conquered by a foreign army and subjected to military law, I think it's not too soon for honest men to rebel and revolutionize. What makes this duty even more urgent? And you're going to say to yourself, what is he talking about? What is he talking about? Let's continue. The country so overrun is not our own, but ours is the invading army. That's a confusing sentence. The country being overrun is not our country, but ours is the invading army. What does that mean? Well, you're going to find out. Pele, a common authority with many on moral questions, in his chapter on, now here's another footnote and citation. The duty of commission of civil government. Pele resolves that all civil obligation, he resolves it into expediency. And he says this: so long as the interest of the whole society requires it, that is, so long as the established government cannot be resisted or changed without public inconveniency, then it is the will of God that the established government be obeyed and no longer. Think about this. He's making an argument here that he's calling some type of revolution. He's saying we're the standing army, we're the army. What was he talking about here? You're going to find out shortly that he is anti-slavery. There were slaves in 1846 prior to Civil War, and Thoreau, was an abolitionist. He did not like slavery. He thought it's inconsistent with the government. He quotes Pele, and you can look up Pele. This principle being admitted, the justice of every particular case of resistance is reduced to computation of the quantity of the danger and grievance on one side, and of the probability and expense of redressing it on the other. They used to write very confusingly in those days, didn't they? Of this, Paley says, every man shall judge for himself. Of this, what's this? Of this principle. This. A particular case resisting the government is reduced to a computation, a calculation, of the quantity of the danger and grievance on one side and the probability of expense of redressing it, the issue, on the other. And every man shall judge for himself. But, there's the but, Paley appears never to have contemplated those cases to which the rule of expediency does not apply, in which a people, as well as an individual, must do justice cost what it may. In other words, he's saying Paley didn't think this through. There are certain situations where justice, no matter what the cost, you have to pursue justice. If I have unjustly wrested a plank from a drowning man, here's his example, pay attention. If I have unjustly took a plank from a drowning man, I must restore it to him though I drown myself. This, according to Paley, would be inconvenient. So now he's arguing against Paley. So a drowning guy, right? If I unjustly took a plank from a drowning man, he's hanging onto a piece of timber, I take it away, I have to give it back to him, though I drown myself. But Paley says that would be inconvenient. And he uses the word inconvenient here. But he that would save his life in such a case shall lose it, right? If I take that board and give it back to him, I'm going to die. Because, I'm going to die, theoretically. How can you say that? Follow the example. This people must cease to hold slaves. This people, here we go. This is the gist. This people, American people, must cease to hold slaves. And they must cease to make war on Mexico, though it cost them their existence as a people. Ladies and gentlemen, now we finally find out what this is all about. Pay attention. This is essays are hard to read sometimes, aren't they? Especially if you don't live in 1846. You got to read it a few times. Americans must cease to hold slaves, make war on Mexico, though it cost them their existence. Think about what he's saying. It's the example of taking the board from the guy. I can't take the board from the guy. I got to give it back to him, even though I'll drown. So I can't hold slaves and I can't make a war on Mexico, even if that means I will cease to exist. That's his premise. That's his argument. In their practice, nations agree with Paley, but does anyone think that Massachusetts does exactly what is right at the present crisis? He includes a drab of state, O cloth, O silver slut, to have her train borne up and her soul trail in the dirt. I wasn't able to source that. Maybe you can. Email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Practically speaking, the opponents to reform in Massachusetts are not 100,000 politicians at the South, but 100,000 merchants and farmers here who are more interested in commerce and agriculture than they are in humanity. And they're not prepared to do justice to the slave or to Mexico, cost what it may. He's putting down his own people, right? I quarrel not with far-off foes, but with those who near to home cooperate with and do the bidding of those far away, and without whom the latter would be harmless. He's picking. I don't care about what people far from us, but people in Massachusetts are more concerned about what? They're more concerned about agriculture and commerce than they are about slaves and war. We are accustomed to say that the mass of men are unprepared. But improvement is slow because the few are not materially wiser or better than the many. The few are not, see? It is not so important that many should be as good as you, as that there may be some absolute goodness somewhere. For that will leaven the whole lump. We've got to have some good people someplace. There are thousands who are, in opinion, opposed to slavery and to the war. And yet, in effect, they do nothing to put an end to them. Who, esteeming themselves children of Washington and Franklin, they sit down with their hands in their pockets, and they say that they know not what they do, and do nothing. Who even postpone the question of freedom to the question of free trade, and quietly read the prices current along with the latest advices from Mexico after dinner, and it may be fall asleep over them both. What is the price current of an honest man and patriot today? They hesitate, they regret, and sometimes they petition, but they do nothing in earnest and with effect. They will wait, well disposed, for others to remedy the evil, that they may no longer have to regret. And at most, they give only a cheap vote and a feeble countenance and Godspeed to the right as it goes by them. There are 999 patrons of virtue to one virtuous man, but it is easier to deal with the real possessor of a thing than with the temporary guardian of it. Think about that. All voting is a sort of gaming. It's like checkers or backgammon with a slight moral tinge, a playing with the right and wrong, with moral questions. And betting naturally accompanies it. The character of the voter is not staked. The character of people who vote isn't staked. I cast my vote, perchance as I think I'm right, but I am not vitally concerned that the right should prevail. I am willing to leave it to the majority. Its obligation, therefore, never exceeds that of expediency. It's just convenient. Remember the word expediency? Even voting for the right is doing nothing for it. This is important, how you're going to define what's right from what's not right. That's one of the essence of this essay. That's one of the things you're going to have to think about. And you're going to have to realize what this guy thinks is right and what's not right. Even voting for the right is doing nothing for it. It is only expressing to men feebly your desire that it should prevail. A wise man will not leave the right to the mercy of chance, nor wish it to prevail through the power of the majority. There is but little virtue in the action of the masses of men. And when the majority shall at length vote for the abolition of slavery, it will be because that they are indifferent to slavery, or because that there is but little slavery left to be abolished in any case by their vote. They will then be the only slaves. Only his vote can hasten the abolition of slavery, who asserts his own freedom by his vote. I hear of a convention to be held in Baltimore or elsewhere for the selection of a candidate for the presidency, made up chiefly of editors, of men who are politicians by profession. But I think, what is it to any independent, intelligent, and respectable man, what decision that they may come to, shall we not have the advantage of his wisdom and honesty nevertheless? Can we not count upon some independent votes? Are there not many individuals in the country who do not attend conventions? See what he said? I mean, we're not all going to conventions. But, there's the but. But no, I find that the respectable man, so-called because has immediately drifted from his position and despairs of his country when his country has more reason to despair of him. He forthwith adopts one of the candidates thus selected as the only available one, thus proving that he is himself available for any purposes of the demagogue. His vote is of no more worth than that of any unprincipled foreigner or hireling native who may have been bought. Oh, for a man who is a man, and as my neighbor says, has a bone in his back which you cannot pass your hand through. Our statistics are at fault. The population has been returned too large. How many men are there to a square 1,000 miles in this country? Hardly one. Does not America offer any independence for men to settle here? The American has dwindled into Oddfellow. One of those that may be known by the development of his organ of gregariousness, talkativeness, and of a manifest lack of intellect and cheerful self-reliance, whose first and chief concern on coming into the world is to see that the almshouse are in good repair, and before he has lawfully donned his virile garb, to collect a fund for the support of the widows and orphans, that may be, who, in short, ventures to live only by the aid of the mutual insurance company, which has the promise to bury him decently. He doesn't like politicians. Is it not a man's duty, as a matter of course, to devote himself to the eradication of any, even the most enormous wrong? He may still properly have other concerns to engage him, but it is his duty at least to wash his hands of it, and if he gives it no thought longer, not to give it practically his support. If I devote myself to other pursuits and contemplations, I must first see at least that I do not pursue them sitting upon another man's shoulders. I must get off of him first, that he may pursue his own contemplations. You see what gross inconsistency is tolerated? I have heard that some of my townsmen say, quote, I should like to have them order me out and help them down in the insurrection of those slaves, or to march against Mexico. You see if I would go. End quote. And yet these very men have each directly, by their allegiance, and so indirectly, at least by their money, they have furnished a substitute. The soldier is applauded who refuses to serve in an unjust war, right? By those who do not refuse to sustain the unjust government which makes the war. Is applauded by those whose own act and authority he disregards, and he sets at naught, as if the state were pertinent to the degree that it hired one to scourge while it sinned. In other words, beat himself up while he's not, but not to the degree that it left off sinning for a moment. This is a bit of a hypocrisy he's pointing out. Thus, under the name of order and civil government, we are all made at last to pay homage to and support our own meanness. After the first blush of sin comes its indifference. And from immoral, it becomes, as it were, unmoral, and not quite unnecessary to that life which we have made. The broadest and most prevalent error requires the most disinterested virtue to sustain it. The broadest and most prevalent error requires the most disinterested virtue to sustain it. The slight reproach to which the virtue of patriotism is commonly liable, the noble are most likely to incur. Those who, while they disapprove of the character and measures of government, yield to it, the government, their allegiance and support, are undoubtedly its most conscientious supporters, and so frequently the most serious obstacles to reform. Some are petitioning the state to dissolve the Union. You see what he's saying here? To disregard the requisitions of the president. Now, why do they not dissolve it themselves? Why petition, right? The union between themselves and the state, and then refuse to pay their quota into the treasury. Do they not stand in the same relation to the state that the state does to the union? And have not the same reasons prevented the state from resisting the union, which have prevented them from resisting the state? You have to read this over several times. This is a foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the Civil War because of slavery. How can a man be satisfied to entertain an opinion merely and enjoy it? Is there any enjoyment in it if his opinion is that he's aggrieved? My opinion, in other words, I'm aggrieved. I'm hurt. I'm insulted. You don't enjoy that type of opinion. If you are cheated out of a single dollar by your neighbor, you do not rest satisfied without knowing that you are cheated, or saying that you are cheated, or even with petitioning him to pay you your due. But you take effectual steps at once to obtaining the full amount and to see that you are never cheated again. Action from principle. The perception and the performance of the right changes things and relations. It is essentially revolutionary, and it doesn't consist wholly of anything which was. It not only divides states and churches, it divides families. It divides the individual, separating the diabolical in him from the divine. This is very important, and that's why this line is here. Action from principle. The perception that performance of right, the perception and the performance of right, there's that word again, right, changes things. It is essentially revolutionary, and it doesn't consist of anything which was. It divides states, churches, families, and yourself. Once you start thinking like this. Unjust laws exist, and shall we be content to obey them? Or shall we endeavor to amend them and to obey them until we have succeeded? Or shall we transgress them at once? And herein, ladies and gentlemen, is the essence of the essay, right here. I'm going to read it again. Unjust laws exist. What's he talking about? Slavery, right? War. Shall we be content to obey them? Or shall we endeavor to amend them and obey them until we've succeeded in amending them, or shall we transgress them at once? In other words, disobey the law. What's the title of this essay? Civil disobedience. Think about this. Men generally, under such a government as this, think that they ought to wait until they have persuaded the majority to alter them. They think that if they should resist, the remedy would be worse than the evil. But, there's the but it is the fault of the government itself that the remedy is worse than the evil. It makes it worse. What's it? The government makes it worse, the remedy. Why is it not more apt to anticipate and provide for reform? Why does it not cherish its wise minority? Why does it cry and resist before it is hurt? Why does it not encourage its citizens to be more on the alert to point out its faults and do better than it would have them? Why does it always crucify Christ and excommunicate Copernicus and Luther and pronounce Washington and Franklin rebels? Think about this. This paragraph right here is the essence of his argument. He's talking about the government, and he's asking you, is it better to wait, try to petition it, or disobey the law? Civil disobedience. Now, Jimmy ain't saying what to do. Jimmy is saying this is Thoreau's opinion, and you better understand it. Well, Jimmy, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm never disobeying the law. Good for you. That's good. But that's not what I care about right now. I want you to care about what Henry David is telling us about what he did. And you're going to see in this essay, he does he practices what he preaches. When you don't practice what you preach, what are you? You're a hypocrite. But before you begin to preach, like Henry David did, right? That you should object to this and you should revolt. And he does. He goes to jail. You're going to find out. Okay? That's a big thing, to go to jail for doing something, for resisting. So this is the essence of the argument that we're going to come to again and again and again when we analyze it. And all of this other stuff is his way of telling you, you better think about these things. These are serious questions. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, essays are written. And we only read classical essays. This is a classical essay. One would think that a deliberate and practical denial of its authority was the only difference never contemplated by the government. Else, why has it not assigned its definite and its suitable proportionate penalty? And if a man has no property and he refuses but once to earn 9 shillings for the state, he's put in prison for a period of unlimited by the law that I know, and determined only by the discretion for those who put him there. But, there's the but again. If he should steal 90 times 9 shillings from the state, he's soon permitted to go at large again. So let's go back and read that again. If a man who has no property, right, homeless guy, refuses to earn 9 shillings for the state, what do they do with soldiers? They pay him to go to war. If he refuses, they put him in prison for a period unlimited by any law that I know, and determined only by the discretion of those who put him there. If you're drafted and you don't go to war, 1846, they throw you in prison for as long as they want. But if he should steal 90 times 9 shillings from the state, in other words, don't earn it, but you steal it, he's soon permitted to go at large again. See? Henry David Thoreau seems a contradiction in that, right? You won't take my money to go to war, so I'm going to just jail you, but you're going to steal 90 times 9 shillings. I'm going to put you in prison for a bit, but then I'll let you go. If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine, friction of the machine, what's he talking? What is the machine? The state? Friction of the machine of government. Let it go. Let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth, and certainly the machine will wear out. But if the injustice has a spring or a pulley or a rope or a crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will not be worse than the evil. But if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be a counter friction to stop the machine. What I have to do is to see, at any rate, that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. I have to make sure that I don't lend myself to the wrong which I'm condemning. This is a deep, deep, deep thought. As for adopting the ways which the state has provided for remedying the evil, what's the evil here? Slavery, perhaps, going to war. I know not of such ways. They take too much time, and a man's life will be gone. I have other affairs to attend to. I came into this world not chiefly to make this a good place to live in, but to live in it, be it good or bad. This is important too. I didn't come into this world to make it a good place. I came to live in it, whether it's good or bad. A man has not everything to do, but something. Can't do everything, but he has something to do. And because he cannot do everything, it is not necessary that he should do something wrong. It is not my business to be petitioning the governor or the legislature any more than it is theirs to petition me. And if they should not hear my petition, well, what should I do then? But in this case, the state has provided no way. The Constitution, the very Constitution, is the evil. This may be some to see the harsh and stubborn and unconciliatory, but it is to treat with the utmost kindness and consideration the only spirit that can appreciate or deserves it. So is all change for the better, like birth and death, which convulse the body. I do not hesitate to say that those who call themselves abolitionists should at once effectually withdraw their support, both in person and property, from the government of Massachusetts. Okay, like him, he's an absolution. Stop supporting the government. This is what he's saying. If you're an absolution, why? Because slavery is against, right? And not wait until they constitute a majority of one before they suffer the right to prevail through them. I think it is enough that if they have God on their side without waiting for the other one. Moreover, any man more right than his neighbors constitutes a majority of one already. We're back to the definition of right. What's right? What is right? We're going to talk about that. I meet this American government or its representative, the state government, directly, face to face, once a year, no more, in the person of a tax gatherer. That's when he meets the state, the American government, the state government, in the form of the tax guy, right? This is the only mode in which a man situated as I am necessarily meets him. And it then says distinctly, recognize me. And the simplest, the most effectual, and in the present posture of affairs, the indispensablest mode of treating with it on the head, of expressing your little satisfaction with and love for it, is to deny it then. Deny it then. My civil neighbor, the tax gatherer, is the very man I have to deal with. For it is, after all, with men, and not the parchment, that I quarrel. And he has voluntarily chosen to be an agent of the government. So how shall he ever know, well, what he is and what he does in the office of the government or as a man until he's obliged to consider whether he shall treat me, his neighbor, from whom he has respect, as a neighbor and well-disposed man, or as a maniac and disturber of the peace, and see if he can get over this objection to his neighborliness without a rudder and more impetuous thought of speech corresponding to his action. I know this well, that if 1,000, if 100, if 10 men, for whom I can name, if 10 honest men only, if one honest man in this state of Massachusetts ceasing to hold slaves were actually to withdraw from this co-partnership and be locked up in the county jail thereof, therefore, it would be the abolition of slavery in America. I want you to think about what he's saying here. There's an allusion here to Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to talk about that in the analysis. He boils it down he starts with 1,000, but then he ends up with one. If one honest man went to jail and stopped holding slaves and went to jail for it, he thinks it would be the abolition of slavery in America. For it matters not how small the beginning may seem to be. What is once well done is done forever. But we love to better talk about it, that we say it is our mission, and reform keeps many scores of newspaper in its service, but not one man. If my esteemed neighbor, the state's ambassador, who will devote his days to the settlement of the question of human rights in the council chamber, instead of being threatened with the prisons of Carolina, were to sit down, the prisoner of Massachusetts, that state, which is so anxious to foist the sin of slavery upon her sister, though at present she can discover only the act of inhospitality to be in the ground and quarrel with her, the legislature would not wholly waive the subject in the following winter. Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. This is one of the most important statements you'll read in your life. Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, a true place for a just man, and again, we have to define what does that mean, a just man, that's an adjective modifying man, is also a prison. But the thought of this sentence is very, very powerful. You just have to define what a just man is, right? And what unjustly is. Because I'm not saying let all the prisoners go. I'm not saying that. The proper place today, the only place which Massachusetts has provided for her freer and less desponding spirits, is in her prisons. Now, he's really getting carried away here, but he's writing an essay. It's his essay, not yours, not mine. To be put out and locked up by the state by her own act, as they have already put themselves out by their principles. It is there that the fugitive slave and the Mexican prisoner on parole and the Indian come to plead the wrongs of his race should find them. And on that separate but more free, honorable ground where the state places those who are not with her but against her, the only house in the slave state in which a freer man can abide with honor. If any think that their influence would be lost there, and if their voices no longer afflict the ear of the state, that would not be as an enemy within the walls. They don't know by how much truth is stronger than error. In other words, if you think that they're not going to have an effect, you don't know that truth is stronger than error, nor how much more eloquently and effectively he can combat injustice who has experienced a little in his own person. Cast your whole vote, not a strip of paper merely, but your whole influence. A minority is powerless while it conforms to the majority. And it is not even a minority then, but it is irresistible when it clogs by its whole weight. If the alternative is to keep all men just in prison or to give up war or slavery, then the state will not hesitate which to choose. If the alternative is to keep all men in prison or give up war and slavery, the state will not hesitate to choose. What do you think that means? If all men, go to prison, that's not going to do it. If 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bills this year, that wouldn't be a violent and bloody measure, as it would be to pay them. That would be the violent and bloody measure, and enable. Oop, we're going to stop there. We're reading a long time, but that's okay. Let's think about this. Minority is powerless while it conforms to the majority. It's not even a minority, but it's irresistible when it clogs by its whole weight. You can clog the majority if you're a minority. You've seen examples of this, I hope. Right? So he's saying if the alternative is to keep all men in prison or give up war and slavery, the state will not hesitate which to choose. If the alternative, right? They're not going to give up, they're just going to keep just men in prison. Or are they? I don't know. Read Lysistrata. Before we go, I want to read this poem, The Burial of Sir John Moore. Not a drum was heard, not a funeral note, as his course to the rampart we hurried. Not a soldier discharged his farewell shot over the grave where our hero we buried. We buried him darkly at dead at night, the sods with our bayonets turning, and by the struggling moonbeams' misty light and the lantern dimly burning. No useless coffin enclosed his breast, nor in sheet nor in shroud we wound him, but he lay like a warrior, taking his rest with his martial cloak around him. Few and short were the prayers we said, and we spoke not a word of sorrow, but we steadfastly gazed on the face that was dead, and we bitterly thought of the morrow. We thought as we hollowed his narrow bed and smothered down his lonely pillow, that the foe and the stranger would tread over his head, and we far away on the billow. Lightly they'll talk of the spirit that's gone, and over the cold ashes upbraid him. But little he'll reck if they let him sleep on in the grave where a Briton has laid him. But half of our task was done when the clock struck the hour for retiring, and we heard the distant and random gun that the foe was sullenly firing. And slowly and sadly we laid him down from the field of his fame, fresh and gory. We carved not a line, we raised not a stone, but left him alone with his glory. You've been reading with Jimmy. Okay? This was part 1 of Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. Finish reading this essay, part 2, and then learn more about watching the analysis of this on this website. We're going to analyze this story. A very, 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 very important classic essay. Be sure to visit other classics with Jimmy on his website. And if you have a question, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. I would encourage you to go back, shut the sound off, and read it yourself, study it, buy the book if you'd like to, study it, think about it. It's very important, these types of thinking, these types of thoughts. I'm not saying they're true, and I'm not saying they're false. What I am saying is that they're important to understand so you could learn how to lead your life. Right? I'm not saying you got to do what Thoreau did. Have a great day.